Good afternoon. It's good to be back. It's good to see some familiar faces. It's good to see a few new faces. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this afternoon. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear end side of this room. I think you all know where they are. Go down the stairs, meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. Check with officer for confirmation. Please can all members and public switch off their phones or turn them to silent. Apologies for absence and substitutions. Councillor Goddison is replacing Councillor Leake for this meeting. Any declarations of interest from anybody? There are no urgent matters being brought to my attention. We need to appoint a vice chairman. Could I have a nomination, please?
Chairman, I propose Graham Faulkner to be the vice chairman.
Is that seconded? Graham, if you'd like to come and join me. Bring one name badge with you. I asked for nominations. I only had one, but if you wish to make another one, please do. Thank you, Sean. Minutes of the committee meeting held on the 13th of April. There are only 3 members here today who were at that meeting, so could they please let me know if there's a problem? Sean, there's a problem.
For the webcast, it's Councillor Keating. Can I just ask a question of clarification in relation to the top item on the top of page 6? The item in relation to £24,500 received from Hart District Council for carrying out their core audit. The simple question I wanted to clarify is that full reimbursement? Thank you.
I don't know the answer to that one. I can refer it to Mr. Gundy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is fully reimbursement.
Anything else? Would these 3 members please just give me a nod? Thank you. Moving on to paper B, use of regulation of investigation powers, 2000 RIPA. Councillor Keating.
As you know, Chair, this is an item that I continue to take a significant interest in, and I have a question in relation to item 3, talking about the viewing of social networks. I'm not questioning the ability to do so. I'm questioning the lack of information as to cause and the relevant level of authorization. Thank you.
Do I have an officer who wants to answer that?
Right, there is no level of authorisation for a single viewing of a social networking site. In the RIPA policy that was approved by this committee in November, I believe, it was agreed that if it was necessary to undertake an initial investigation viewing a social networking site, then an officer could go in and do this once. If it was believed that there was cause to undertake further investigation and further viewings of that site, then an authorisation would be granted at that stage, or asked for and granted at that stage. In terms of the detail, the internal audit were fraud investigations, HR were disciplinaries, Exchequer were debt collection, and planning enforcement was a planning enforcement issue. if there's specific information that you would like on this paper in future, it would be useful to know what level of detail that you would actually like to see.
Councillor Keating?
Thank you, Chair. I don't believe that my own view of what I'd like to ask should determine the standards for application of RIPA. I can't get the information from what is written that all of the individual internal audit, for example, were all separate individual only viewings. It doesn't show that. And it could lead one to conclude that 7 viewings were 7 viewings of one person, or one site, shall I say, or 7 individual sites. I don't know. So that's why I'm asking the question. And I believe I'm legitimate in asking those questions. Can I say, I do not believe that the legal powers under RIPA are applicable or appropriate for any HR disciplinaries. It really is using a cudgel to crack a little nut, because these powers are serious powers, and they shouldn't be used just because you've got a disciplinary and you have a mechanism. The 2 viewings on Facebook are for the Exchequer. What was that again, if you don't mind reminding me, please?
Debt collection.
Debt collection. I can understand that. So, I genuinely believe that there is an issue, and every time we get a better report or a more extensive report, we have more and more concerns. Well, certainly I do. Today, internal audit dealing with potential fraud or whatever, I don't have an issue with that. I genuinely don't have an issue with the principle. But if it's more than once viewing, that goes beyond the non-authorization element. You don't need an authorization for one viewing, but if it's more than one viewing, it would go beyond it. And who would authorize in those circumstances? It's unspecified, it's unclear. The issue of a disciplinary, I believe, is totally outwith the RIPA powers and should never be used. And I put that to this committee. This should never be used for disciplinary issues, internal disciplinary issues. The other ones, I accept that they're legitimate. It's a legitimate tool for the carrying out of legitimate business. But authorization and disciplinary, they're 2 significant concerns. Thank you, Chair.
Right. From what you say, you'd like a little bit more detail on the report indicating the nature of the problem.
Only the nature, not the individual.
No, just the nature of the problem. And you're concerned about the use on disciplinary. Now, on the disciplinary, I'd just like to ask the officer whereabouts that sits within RIPA.
RIPA, first of all, doesn't actually give us any power to do anything. RIPA provides a level of protection against the breach of somebody's human rights, and that's the right to privacy. We can only get formal RIPA authorisation for prevention detection of crime if the crime being investigated carries a custodial sentence of at least 6 months imprisonment. RIPA has never covered employment issues, and that wouldn't fall under RIPA regardless. That doesn't mean we can't investigate by undertaking some form of surveillance, but we can't do it with the protection of RIPA. Fraud, depending on the fraud, is likely to carry that custodial sentence. Planning enforcement won't any longer. So what we've tried to do, because the Office of Surveillance Commissioners has expressed concern about an increase in the use of social networking sites to carry out investigations on people, we've expanded essentially the ability to do that because it's a useful tool to be able to investigate people online now. And we've brought in an authorisation procedure which covers activities that wouldn't fall under RIPA, so employment, for example, littering, all the things that don't carry that custodial sentence. But in terms of the viewing of social networking sites, there is no clear guidance from the surveillance commissioners or from the Home Office. So we have put our own procedure in place which allows a single viewing, and that is one single viewing of an individual site. Bearing in mind we're not having to log in to do this, they're fairly open without any privacy settings, and any future viewings will have to be authorised. If it's an offence that falls under RIPA, so if it's a criminal offence with a custodial sentence, it would be a formal RIPA authorisation, which can only be authorised by either of the directors or the chief executive, and will have to be approved by magistrates. If it doesn't fall under the crime threshold, we have introduced a non-RIPA form, and the authorisation would be head of service.
Councillor Keating, does that satisfy you?
Certainly it answers some of the question, but it doesn't satisfy me in any shape or form, Chair. I am concerned that we're exceeding the standards that we as a council have set in terms of investigatory powers authorisation. We've now got to the point where we're not authorising at all one viewing on the social media, and we don't know who's authorising more than one viewing on the same social media site. We don't know. And we just learned that we have an authorisation procedure for viewings on social media. Well, first of all, I'd like to see a copy, please. And second of all, I want to continue to register my extreme concerns about the approach, which is not standard in terms of RIPA. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I think we can get a copy of the procedure distributed to the members of the committee. Sorry, I'll have another speaker first. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I think certainly this is something we've got to now have a continuing eye on. I don't totally share Councillor Keating's anxieties to the same degree, but I was going to just ask that if the internal authorisation code procedures was not too large a document, then possibly it could form part of the report, which would remind us how this works when we're looking at, because I do believe, I think as this is developing, it will become something that may be a bigger issue, and more information, not obviously detailed of cases, but whether it's disciplinary and so forth, I think wouldn't be a bad idea as well. If the authorisation code procedures is too big a document, then of course that's not obviously practicable for it to be incorporated in the paper. I think we need to know, yes, a bit more how it is operating.
I think the detail you've asked for we've already requested in future reports. Councillor Putty.
Thanks, Chairman. Just to declare, because magistrate court was mentioned, so I have to declare an interest in that particular subject.
Noted. Moving on, paper C, the Treasury Management Annual Report for 2014-15. Head of Resources, Kevin Jacquist, to present. Councillor Parker.
Before you start, can I just ask you, I do note, if I'm on the right paper, that this is possibly a paper which was agreed by the Cabinet 6 days prior. if I'm correct.
I believe that's what it says.
Well, in order of procedure, we, the Audit Committee, are now being asked to review and agree a report that's already gone to Cabinet. Then, Chair, I'd ask you, do you think procedurally that is correct?
As the report is for noting, I can't see any problem with that.
Usually, often this committee will add comments to a paper for consideration, even if it's noting. We sometimes will make comments. It seems to me to be cart before the horse. If it's already gone to Cabinet, when we're now being asked to look at it. We're being asked to look at something that's already now been agreed. So, quite honestly, for what purpose are you now asking this committee to look at this paper?
Because we are required to. It's part of our terms of reference. However, I'm sure Dean will tell us exactly why it went to Cabinet first. Or Kevin's.
Well, it's a product of how the committee cycle is. It's an outturn report, so it's for the financial year 14-15. It isn't possible to produce it in time for the earlier committee, which was April. So really, that's the factor of how the committee scheduling is. If members want to suggest an audit committee that's earlier in the month, before Cabinet, or we move Cabinet to a later date, then that's something that can be looked at for the future timetabling schedule. I think that's been agreed for next up to May so far, isn't it? So there's an opportunity to look at it for 16-17, Chair.
Well, I think I would take Councillor Parker's suggestion on board that if we are going to comment on it, it would be useful if those comments could go to Cabinet before they approve it. Dean, do you want to carry on?
Just a point of clarification there, Cabinet don't actually approve the report, they just note the report, and then they refer the report on to full council for full council to note the report. It is a performance report, just a statement of fact, doesn't require any decisions.
Sounds fine to me, but I still think any comments that we had should be circulated to all members if it's going to council. Over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce, this is paper C on page 9 of 129. It's the annual Treasury Management Outturn Report. Attached is a copy of the Treasury Management Annual Report that was presented to Cabinet last week. The report is also being presented to Council on the 16th of July. There is one amendment to the report that's going to full council, in that there's now the inclusion of a paragraph referring to the council's ethical investment statement. It basically just says that the council's ethical policy now includes a statement on the council's approach to ethical investment, and that paragraph, and the fact that although the new policy doesn't actually come into effect until the 1st of April 2015, so it's actually for the new year, as soon as Council approved it in February, we did actually comply with that new policy. So all current and new investments followed that policy statement. In terms of the performance for 2014-15, the Treasury Management function generated £3.1 million of income for the year. This was £0.4 million short of the original estimate. The shortfall is not unanticipated. It had been reported throughout the year in the monitoring reports, and was effectively funded from savings found elsewhere in the budget. The reasons for the shortfall were primarily that the original estimate was quite an ambitious estimate. It assumed that long-term interest rates would have increased during the year in anticipation of increases in short-term rates, and this didn't actually happen. In fact, long-term rates actually fell by about 1% for the 5-year and 10-year gilts during the year. The original estimate also assumed that the council would have invested £30 million in the new diversified credit funds from the beginning of the year. Again, this didn't happen due to delays and issues with the due diligence work that was being undertaken, and one of the funds we couldn't actually invest in, so we had to seek an alternative fund. So we actually did some investment in those funds in December, so we invested 20 million in December. Could we have avoided the shortfall? There were other options for the council. One of the options was to look at long-term investment in gilts. However, when we were looking to invest throughout the year, because the rates had fallen, they'd now fallen to unprecedented levels in terms of 5-year and 10-year gilts. The Treasury Management team decided not to do this because effectively it would lock the council into very low returns for many years to come. However, if long-term rates continue to stay at these unprecedented levels, the council might have to effectively bite the bullet and invest in longer-term gilts. The shortfall situation for last year also has an impact in the current year. The current year assumed an original estimate of £3.5 million of income, which is becoming increasingly unlikely to be achieved, and the council may need to revise the current year's estimate to £3.2 million if long-term rates don't start to increase. On a more positive note, the portfolio is now well placed to take advantage of any increases in short-term and long-term rates. The return for the year, which was about 2%, was well above inflation, which for the year was 0%. The return was more than double the average return achieved by other councils, and one of the highest of all the councils in England. Other councils are taking a lot more risk in their portfolios and are largely returning returns of less than 1%. So if you've got any questions on the report, I'll do my best to answer them.
Any questions? Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. Just the odd one or two. My first question goes back to an issue that was raised at our training session last week. I'm talking about paragraph 2.6 on page 10 of 129. The CPI at the end of March was 0 and compares favourably with the Council's peers. Could you tell me who the peers are, please, and name them? You don't have to name them on the spot. If you have a list, that would be fine. Thank you.
Yes, we can certainly send you round. Well, part of the benchmarking is done through our advisors, Arling Close Limited. They have a number of clients, well over 100 clients in the local authority environment. They produce this benchmarking information. I'm not sure that we can actually get from them. We could probably get from them a list of all of their clients. We wouldn't necessarily be able to tie that up with what sort of returns each one got. We just know where we are relative to the others. We also take part in the SITFA benchmarking, and they can we can produce a list of the authorities that are in the SITFA benchmarking as well, if you would like that as well.
Councillor Keating.
If I might clarify, I have no interest in simply identifying who the clients of Audit and Close are, because I don't think it's part of my role to identify those for any particular purpose. But I find it difficult to understand that any organisation would say, we have clients 124 today, and that's the benchmark. That is illogical. It's irrational to say, we'll benchmark you against each and any client we take up. It's irrational. One has to have a reasoning to exercise judgment to say these are the peers which it is reasonable to contrast your performance with as against others. The whole list of clients doesn't, in my view, make rational sense, because they could be very successful next year, and they could have 240 clients. The following year they could have 500 clients. It's not rational to say we don't have a list against we will compare you. That's the first point. The second point is, if that is the only mechanism for Arlington Close, then I'd be concerned. But the CIFRA list is obviously of a much more controlled nature, I would assume, and the names on that list would be helpful, only for the purposes of carrying out our duties as members of this particular committee. That's the first point, and I'll leave it with you for now. Thank you for that, Chair. Can I move on, please?
I was waiting for you to do so.
Thank you very much. The next point is a new point, but it's one that I've been mulling over for some considerable time. If we look at page 12 of 129, the second bullet point down identifies, of course, that the interest returns were less than we hoped or wanted. And I don't have a difficulty with the issue there. But the last sentence of second bullet point says, however, as there is a significant outturned surplus, within the rest of the whole council budget, the shortfall will be met from the surplus. Now, I'm concerned that we have repeatedly made arrangements for officers to decide, as far as I'm aware, that is, for officers to decide how a surplus would be used. Because we have rules which say, this is your budget line, if that's in surplus, then somebody like the political operators, the cabinet and whoever, will decide how the budget surplus is spent. And we have rules which say if it's not allocated by the proper authority, it goes into reserves. We have reserves for just about everything. But in these particular circumstances, we bypass those rules. We don't put items A into surplus reserve fund A and take money out of reserve fund B to cover some other expenditure. We simply take the budget for the year and just transfer money without putting them in and out of surpluses or reserves. I think that's bad practice. And that's the issue I wanted to raise today. Thank you.
Well, the question I would have is, who made that decision? That is the question I would like answered.
Answer that, Chair. The answer to who made the decision, it will be Council who makes that decision, because it's in the outturn report that Cabinet recommended on to Council at the last meeting. I think members don't need to get, I hesitate to say this, but they need to get too exercised in this, in that it's actually is following the policy, it's just not actioning it in an in and out basis. So the Council policy is that if there is a deficit or a surplus on the investment income, that goes into or comes out of the reserve. So what could have happened in this instance was there was a draw out of the reserve to match this. No, but the reason there wasn't is because the other council policy says that the first call on any outturned surplus is to top up the risk reserves. So what would have happened is you would have had the money coming out of the risk reserve for interest going into the budget. There would have been a surplus on the budget, and the first call on that would have been to put the money back in to the reserve. So you end up with the same amount in the reserve in the same position. So it's in effect the same thing without those entries, and it's being made clear that's what the case is. So it's an accounting process rather than a policy. In both instances, the council agreed policies have been followed, and the council will make the decision on the use of the outturn.
I think that could have been made a little bit clearer in the paper, but I think the policy should have been followed and the 2 entries made. It should not have been shortcut. So I agree with Councillor Keating on that one. But has that decision now been made by council, or is it part of the paper that's going to council for approval?
It's part of the cabinet proposals that are going to the next council meeting.
I'll allow Councillor Parker to pop in here because I know he's dying to say it.
Point made, Chair, of my earlier with regard to when we as a committee are receiving this paper and when it goes to Cabinet.
As the paper has gone to Cabinet and been approved by Cabinet, but noted, is there an opportunity to change this paper to actually state exactly what has happened?
This paper has been to Cabinet and it's going forward to Council. I just really don't think there is really a need to change it. It's clarifying what has happened in the Treasury Management Report. The Treasury Management Report is explaining what the position is in terms of the interest earnings for the year, which is what it does. The technical funding of that outcome has in effect come from outturned surpluses, which is the same net impact as taking it out of reserve and then putting the money back into the reserve. And that decision is subject to a separate Cabinet and separate Council report.
Sorry, Councillor Keating, go ahead.
We've identified, and actually, I understand the point you're making, Kevin, and I'm not suggesting there's anything untoward about the practice. I'm simply saying, in my view, if we're dealing with accountancy practices and standards, then you only have to have one standard. And the question I would ask is there any other form of transfer of funds from Budget A and Budget B and Budget C that takes place without the proper in-out accounting mechanisms?
Well, there isn't, and I would argue that this doesn't either, because it's as I've explained, it's actioning the same impact under the council's policies.
I understand what you're saying. I just agree with you.
Councillor Tilbury?
Well, on page 27 of 129, I was just intrigued on the government gilts there. There's several there that all seem to be similar sort of maturity dates, but they sort of vary from 4.5% to one as low as 1.75, then back to 4.75%. I wonder why there's sort of variation there. It just seemed a bit odd. You know, I know they sort of vary over time, but
yeah, the percent figure that you see there, that is the coupon. So that is the physical amount of cash that we get paid for holding that gilt. That isn't the sort of effective return that we get from that gilt, because as you're probably aware, when we buy gilts, we buy them either above or below their face value, depending on where they're currently trading. I'm not sure whether, I know in the monitoring reports that you've been receiving throughout the year, we did actually change this particular appendix to include what the actual return is, the sort of net return that we're getting on them. Because obviously, if we buy a gilt and it's paying us 4%, if we paid over the odds to buy that gilt, effectively we're not getting 4%. So we have to do an accounting amortisation of that extra bit that we paid over and above the face value, and that effectively reduces the net sort of return that we're getting from those. So I think certainly in the current monitoring reports, we've added a new column which identifies what the actual return is. What you see there is the name of the gilt. It's a UK Treasury gilt. The 4.75% enables us to identify which particular gilt it is. And as I said, that is the amount that they are physically paying us in terms of the coupon, if that makes sense.
And the other one was, and again, it's the same sort of thing as to do with it's the time when we buy them. On the next page, obviously, if you look at the top one there, there's a valuation that obviously shows a loss against the Lloyds Bank one there, but obviously you know they're going to vary over time. But would it be useful if we could have the sort of the date we bought them? Because if you bought something 10 years ago and you're showing a loss on it now, that would suggest it was a bad investment. If we only bought that a week ago and it's dropped in the short term, I mean, anything this week's going to drop with Greece and such like, isn't it? But it gives a bit of an indication over time. The same with the M&G Alpha one is quite a new one at the bottom there. Obviously we've got the data, but the Lloyds Bank one, there's sort of not an indication as to when we bought it, how much it's sort of varied on there. Whether that would be a useful sort of indicator on there, because obviously with a lot of the other stuff, it's fairly obvious when we bought, or the maturity date gives an indication, doesn't it?
Yes, we can certainly look to improve the sort of monitoring reports that you receive, and if you want us to put in the purchase date as well as the maturity date, then that's fine. We have all the information. It's just getting as much information as we can into these reports.
Okay, can we move to the recommendation on page 3 of 21? The Treasury Management Annual Reports, which includes the Prudential Indicator Actuals for 14-15, been noted, and the Capital Finance Requirement, the Minimum Revenue Position Requirement are both nil, be noted. Paper D, Internal Audit Annual Report, which we are recommended that. We note the opinion of the Internal Audit Manager in 6.5 and approve the update in 8.1.
Can I speak on that?
I'd like the officer to present first, please.
Okay.
But let you speak next.
Yeah, my way. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just like to start by informing you there's a change to the reports. Hopefully you received the email I sent out on Thursday. If you didn't, I'll just quickly run through those changes. Page 34 of 129, paragraph 5.2. The table that you see there under 14-15 should read full assurance 7, substantial assurance 14, reasonable assurance 3, and limited and no assurance there's no change. That is because there is a change on Appendix 1, which is page 38. If I could just give you those updates. Yeah, definitely. So it should read, for 14-15 table should read 7-14-310. And Appendix 1, if you turn to page 39 of 129, the assurance level for 14-15 for grants to organisations was substantial, not reasonable, as I recorded originally. And land charges, that was a substantial assurance as well, not full that I originally recorded. Okay. So if you're happy with that, members, I'll introduce my paper. This is a report that gives you my overall opinion on the control environment for the 2014 financial year. The things I take into account when coming up with that assurance level is looking at the work that internal audit have done through the year, and as you know, you will receive the progress reports through the year, giving you the executive summaries and the assurance levels we give for each of the audits that we carry out. I also carry out an assessment against the public sector internal audit standards, which is a SIPFA standard, and there are 334 questions in there, so I haven't given you all of the questions, but if you want it, I can gladly send it to you in an email. That's right, yeah. But there are 7 questions where we do not comply, and they are detailed in paragraphs 7.6 and 7.7 of my report, which is on page 36 of 129. I have attached a action plan so you can see what we're going to do with those non-compliance areas, and that's appendix 3, which is page 41 of 129. And the other area I'd like to just bring to your attention in my report is paragraphs 8.1. Following the committee paper that I brought to you in April, I've met with the Chief Executive, and he's asked for 2 pieces of work to be carried out in the 15-16 audit plan. So I am going to ask the committee to approve that amendment to the audit plan. I'll hand over for questions. Thank you.
Councillor Flemmore.
Yes, Chairman. I'm just a little bit concerned about the Chief Executive's request for the appreciating the need to be prudent with the council's money, but I wouldn't like to see any planning change to the planning procedure regarding appeals. I think you would invite bad planning, and we don't want to be running scared of developers on this issue. And I think whilst it's prudent to carry out this procedure, I think there is a bigger motive issue on planning by appeal that needs to be taken into account when we're doing this.
I think one thing we need to look at are the recommendations that come out of that review, because we may not be happy with them, from what you say. Anybody else got questions? Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. Do we know why the Chief Executive wanted to review the commissioning programme?
I believe it's because it's a key project that's being carried out by the council as he joined, and he's just interested to know how it's progressing.
Could I add to the point made by Councillor Phillimore? I don't believe audit should be involved in planning. The reality that we've got, now I know you're talking accounting, but the problem that we've got in the borough in planning terms is we don't have a local plan. We're 5 years late having a local plan, and we don't have a 5 years land supply, and those 2 factors enable any developer who is refused planning permission for housing to go to appeal. And those 2 factors contribute to the normal decision is to allow the developer to build, because he would be contributing to fixing the problem that we currently have. We can't control developers going to appeal, and neither can we control in any effective sense here to whether they'll win or lose. But we are losing every single possible appeal because we don't have a local plan and we don't have a 5-year land supply. And we're not going to fix it in audit. We're going to account for it in audit, and the accounts are going to show that there's over £300,000 that we've incurred charges so far will just going to continue going up until we get a local plan. And what we ought to be doing is we need to be spending every day getting a local plan. That's what we ought to be doing. But that's not what I'm here for. other than to ensure that people understand that we cannot fix the planning problem. Well, the planners have to do that. But we are councillors, we can contribute to that. Can I just make a number of points, if I may, Chair? Obviously things are getting better in terms of audit because we're getting longer in the tooth as well. And we're contributing to the discussions about matters that are of concern to us. There are essentially, in my long experience of being on the audit committee, no huge concerns that I've got in relation to this particular report. Obviously there are variations in some of the practices and procedures and performances, but they seem to be within an acceptable level of range of performance. So I'll shut up. Thank you.
I thank you for that. I do note your comment. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I am conscious of the delicacy of this issue and will take your guidance, but I am concerned at paragraph 7.7, page 36. And we get very little detail. It seems to be something that is an internal audit issue that's being brought to our attention, but effectively the detail is only being shared with the past chair and the new chair. So maybe I would, I don't understand that item. I don't really appreciate what it's telling us, but I'm alarmed by its being there.
Thank you, Chair. It's just that one of the questions in the standard that I've carried assessment out on asked that question: does the Chief Financial Officer speak to the Chair of the committee when carrying out an annual appraisal on myself? That's purely all it is, and that's something that is going to happen for this financial year. So it's just showing that we haven't done it in the past because it's a new standard, and it will be actioned between Kevin and the Chair of the committee. That's all it is.
Thank you for the clarification.
Any other questions? Councillor Tilbury.
Yeah, I mean, come back to this 8.1, the audit of the planning process. Well, if you took away the part of the sentence saying the value for money and cost effectiveness, I wouldn't have a problem with, to carry out a review of the development control decision-making process. I know we've done that, but the point is, if we're looking at value for money, you just wouldn't deal with any appeal. You would just say, well, we won't bother because there is a potential to cost us money in any appeal. It's always a bit arbitrary how anyone would deal with that. But I don't see how we can audit that. That's an audit issue there. It's development control anyway. It's how they do it. You could argue they need to understand the process better or whatever. But I mean, they're making decisions. We have to assume that Development Control Committee, some who are here, are actually doing that, and they are making decisions on that basis there. If we're looking at it from a financial point of view, we wouldn't contest anything, would we? And that's the danger. If it's sort of being suggested that we can't afford to do this, that's another issue. Then, and we're in a relatively good financial position to contest stuff. We can afford to lose these things, so it does seem a bit of a concern to worry about things like that, considering all the problems we had with many down in the first place, where those who suggested that we should contest it, it was suggested we were bringing the council into disrepute, I seem to recall, by a previous chief executive, so which cost us rather a lot of money, so that could have saved us a fortune. So it seems a bit late to worry about this now, when, to a certain extent, a lot of these problems are self-inflicted.
I understand what you say, but I can see the reason why there is a review, but I would be concerned when the recommendations come back, and that is a time to look at it in more detail. Councillor Parker.
Yes, Chair.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Could just come back on in there. When we carry out that review, as we've mentioned here, we will look at how other authorities are organised and how they deal with this. If we find a few authorities in the same situation we are in, then we would just want to see how are they dealing with the issue, and see if there's anything we can learn from, if there's any recommendation we can make. So there's something else we'll be looking at and carrying out that review. That's if it's approved by the committee, of course.
I just wanted to query whether this is an audit issue. Why is this not in itself going to scrutiny? The purpose of scrutiny is to look at how things go well, how things go wrong, what can we do better? And I am just wondering whether this is a matter of internal audit or whether it is actually an issue that should be referred to scrutiny.
Well, as nobody has referred it to scrutiny, it isn't a matter for scrutiny. It will be something that internal audit will look at.
Yeah, well, yes, Chair. I mean, I think the point was made earlier. I mean, that internal audit are getting the information, the facts, looking at other authorities, what the council then and what councillors then choose to do with that after there's a series of recommendations from internal audit is for the future. But I think it's important the amount of public money that is being spent on this area means that it's an important area that internal audit should be looking at as part of a process, as part of, as Paul said, part of looking at what other authorities do as well. So I'd recommend that it is something for for internal audit to be looking at. What members then choose to do with the outcome of that is something for the future.
Councillor Keating. Councillor Sherlock.
As the chairman of DC, I happily welcome an investigation into it, and I'm not going to make any comment on it now, but I think it will do no harm. Whether it's scrutiny or audit, I'm not sure. But somebody ought to, it would be clear the air just to have it looked at. Thank you.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask a number of questions of the audit manager? Will you be looking at, do other local authorities have a local plan and lose appeals, or will you be looking at, do other local authorities have no local plan and lose appeals? Will you be looking at the same range of issues in terms of the 5-year land supply? These are all planning issues, but they're germane to the subject matter, very much so, because if you have 2 strikes against you, you lose the appeal. So that's an issue of that. So, I mean, I suspect we're shying away from sending it to scrutiny when we should be sending it directly to scrutiny. And so I'd like to propose that we do that. Thank you.
I think the first thing that scrutiny would want is the internal audit report. Right, moving to the recommendation. Note the opinion of the internal audit manager in 6.5. I can give substantial assurance on the council's control environment, which enables the council's objectives to be met. Agreed? Noted? And approve the update to the 2015-16 internal audit plan as detailed in paragraph 8.1. I think we can approve that. But I would suggest we pass a comment to the Chief Executive that it might be something for scrutiny to look at when the internal audit report comes back. Thank you, Councillor Keating. Moving on, paper E, the internal audit progress report for January to April 2015. Now, this has got a number of sections. It is for noting, but I suggest we look at Appendix 1, the summary of the overdue significant recommendations. We look at Appendix 12, the current recommendations. We look at Appendix 2, housing benefits, which is only reasonable, and the asset register Appendix 7, which is reasonable, but we don't spend too much time worrying about the other reviews, which are either full or substantial. unless there are specific questions from members. And over to Richard Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you stole a bit of my thunder there with what I was going to present. But yes, this is a progress report for the internal audit team, the work that we've undertaken between January and April. The format of the report has evolved over a period of time following recommendations and requests from the committee. So the format, just to run through it quickly, with paragraph 4.1, where we feel benefits show the levels of assurance that we give on the specific audits that we undertake, ranging from full assurance down to the dreaded no assurance, which fortunately we've not yet given any to. And paragraph 4.2 is the levels of categories of recommendations that we give within each audit. So ranging from fundamental, obviously fairly self-explanatory, through significant and just for merits attentions. So that's just for reference and a standard item on every report I present. Paragraph 4.3 is the work that we have completed in the same period, and the tables introduced at the request of the committee to give you a snapshot of the recent situation. And as the Chair quite rightly pointed out, you only really need to be focused on where you see substantial and full assurance. Then we're very happy that the control environment is working well. And it's only where you see reasonable and limited assurance that you probably need to be concerned. And the good thing is there's no limited assurances for this report. So that's the work that we've undertaken in the period January to April. Then just moving on to paragraph 4.4, again just to highlight what the committee needs to be aware of, we have the overdue fundamental recommendations. You will recall from previous meetings this has usually been a much longer list, but there are only 2 recommendations that are outstanding, which is good news, and progress is being made on those recommendations. And then finally, moving on, next paragraph 4.5 is the overdue significant recommendations, again referring to Appendix 1, and again the number of overdue recommendations is coming down, which is good. And then the detail, yes, as you've read them, the detailed summary reports are attached. And I'd just draw your attention to, yes, appendices 1 primarily, which is the overdue recommendations. So any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
I can take questions on the report, or we can start working our way through the appendices. Okay, let's have a look at Appendix 1. Councillor Parker.
I don't know if you're going page by page on that appendix, Chair, or not, but I have a question on page 51.
Go ahead and ask it.
I'd just like to ask, in reference to bottom page of page 51, which is to do with commuted sums, section 106, to ask the officer if the latest management comment is effectively a no to his request.
Yeah, I can get that. There is a verbal update. Since we had this published, the officers had confirmed that the work is complete at the time. Yes, that was the latest position. It was an issue of referencing throughout the planning system, the legal system, and it's just a matter of correlating, make sure that they include the same planning reference number on all documents. The comment from the legal services manager there was basically saying yes, she's done what she can in informing her staff to make sure the right reference is used, and the other officers in planning and development control, yes, have now confirmed the same. So effectively that recommendation is now complete, but it obviously was done after this report was printed.
That's satisfactory, Councillor Parker.
Well, I don't know how many verbal updates there are that need to be reported to the committee, but if there are not too many, then maybe, once they're known, we could have them, because then it prevents asking something that's already now been resolved.
I agree. If there is a verbal update to any recommendation, it should be made at this meeting. Any other questions on Appendix 1? Appendix 2, Housing Benefit Recovery of Overpayments, only received a reasonable moderate assurance. We got any questions on that? Councillor Keating.
As a member of the Audit Committee, I get extremely concerned when we have a report that says there's a fundamental risk. I'm talking about page 3 of 3 of the appendices, and it's page 54 of the report. All overpayments assigned with the debt type remedy should be examined and alternative recovery action undertaken. Now, there's no timing on when that particular recommendation was made, and then the answer comes back over the next 6 months. We'll be looking at each individual account. If it is a fundamental risk, it needs immediate action, doesn't it?
Mr. Bevan, what do you think about that?
The report obviously was completed in February, so that's when the recommendation was agreed with the Exchequer Manager. And I think the timescale completion for September, I think it's an amount of £379,000, which is no small amount of money. And I think there's a lot of individual accounts that need to be reviewed in order to get the debt recovery process going. And I think that gives the Exchequer team a fair amount of time, a reasonable amount of time to actually address the issue, rather than say, they are addressing it immediately. It's just going to take that length of time to actually be able to say, yes, that work is now complete. I think what we previously used to do, we used to give them a month, and then after a month the work wasn't completed and it effectively became overdue. For completion, what we've now given them is a reasonable timescale to actually complete it. So when we report in February, when we report in September, the bulk of that work will be done. I think that's kind of addressed in the Exchequer Manager's response to the recommendation as well. So I'm comfortable, to answer the question, that that the work will be done in that timescale.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In addition to that, we have a rigorous follow-up process, I'm sure you're aware, and the relevant manager will give us a monthly update in their position as to how they are achieving that target. So if they came to us tomorrow, being the end of the month, and said we haven't done anything on it, then we'd obviously be a bit more concerned. We would be if they would say, well, we've actually completed 20% of the task in hand.
As this was in February, is there a verbal update on this item?
No, there's no further update. We'll be sending out the follow-up, the chasing emails that we always do at the end of each month will be next week. So we're able to email a progress report round if you wish.
I would like to see it. Councillor Keating.
I rarely say things foolishly, but I can honestly say I find that answer unacceptable. If we have a fundamental risk and then say, and we'll continue to allow that fundamental risk to exist month after month after month, it really is shocking. It really is shocking. Thank you.
Kevin?
Come in there, Chair. Thank you. I don't think that is the case, Councillor Keating. I think as the comments from the Exchequer Manager say, and as I'm the head of service for this area, I've had the discussion with him as well. The work is ongoing, so the work has started during the audit and after the audit. So work looking and reviewing the cases is started and is ongoing. So it's not the case that the risk is there and nothing's happening for 6 months. The work is ongoing, and as was said, an update can be given. There are over 200 cases, individual cases, so the debt team are looking at these and integrating these into the other debt recovery work that they do. It will take time for them to get through. In my discussion, I had the same sort of discussion about, well, how can it reasonably be done? And again, we're talking about doing that within existing resources of the team. And my view was that that was an appropriate time frame for them to undertake the action, given that they're doing it continually. They're not just leaving it all to the end. They're doing cases as they can. And there's no increasing build-up of these cases. These are historic cases. So I think it's an appropriate time frame, but obviously we'd like to do it as quickly as we can.
Councillor Putty.
Thank you, Chairman. As this is an annual data match with regards to, is it possible for us to have a picture of what happened last year, last annual, when this process was followed?
I think that one's aimed at you, Mr. Bevan.
Sorry, could I just take a clarification what you're after there, please, Councillor?
Last time, as it is an annual one, so what happened last year?
In terms of assurance given for the audit. Where are we? Housing benefits overpayments. So it's a substantial assurance. If you look at page 38 of my previous report to you, page 38 129, we give the comparison from this year to last year, and you'll see the substantial assurance was given for 13-14. Yeah. Okay.
So the situation has deteriorated over the last year. Councillor Keating.
Can I ask, Kevin, why operate within existing resources if additional resources or one form or another could be put to the problem?
Well, as always, as Councillor Keating, it's about looking at and balancing the priorities. And if this had been a different issue, then it may have resulted in a different answer. But in terms of this particular issue, my sort of judgment was that it's one that could be managed, and it needs to be something that's managed by the team on an ongoing basis. And therefore, it seemed to me that this time frame would enable them to look at the 200 odd cases and get them dealt with whilst doing the new recovery. And there's a range of new recoveries for the overpayments that are being generated pretty much every week through the benefits process. So there's a new sets of procedures in place that the team have put in place, and this is about some old debt that's stalled. And to pick up a comment of the chair, yes, there was a deterioration in this particular area, but there was an improvement in the recovery of business rates and council tax, and it's about balancing all of those elements, and the team are now moving on to greater focus, having got some of those processes improved, focusing in improving the overpayment recovery.
Noted. Move on to Appendix. I think we've made our comments known. Appendix 7, the asset register. Once again, we have reasonable assurance. Now, the key findings, control objectives 1, 2 and 3 and 4. I have one question, which is, does anybody ever reconcile the asset register to the financial records?
This audit looks at the operations side, the grass cutting and all the equipment and that's held in the in the various depots and sheds and at Wade Road. So they have, when we've done this audit before, we have had issues. Yes, there's been problems with the actual asset register, where hence why it's only a reasonable assurance it was effectively managed through basically on a spreadsheet, which was updated annually. They've now actually got a better system in place, which they now have a better workflow of updating the records. For example, items that were damaged or broken or stolen weren't being recorded appropriately. So those details are now more accurate, and we're now doing more random spot checks on these these depots and everything to verify what is in the sheds, if you like, is actually on the inventory. With regards to what the financial values, I believe because they're sort of low value, they don't get reported financially individually. This is where hopefully my financial colleagues will be able to clarify that.
Yeah, if I can clarify, when we do the statement of accounts, and for the purposes of the balance sheet, all of these assets fall under the category of property, plant and equipment, and we rely on those asset registers in terms of the existence of assets, and we seek valuations for those assets for inclusion in the council's balance sheet.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a question about the previous appendix, but I'll come back to that if I may. On this particular appendix, I see reference to letters from property manager and no content, but the content of the let me see now, which one was it? Item 7.3 on page 868. The last one, actually. It says, Property Service are in the process of raising an order for TCT as per the email. Now, that doesn't really tell me anything other than that there's an email. And I'm not interested in seeing all the emails flying about, by the way. But it seems if the content of the email is pertinent, it could be just praised here. If it's not pertinent, we don't need to know. But saying we're going to do something is slightly different to actually doing it.
I think this is the statement of intent of the process of raising an order.
Yeah, obviously this is the information that you see on these tables are direct comments, obviously from the officers, and these are taken from our database. We're currently actually looking at changing or improving the system that we use so that the style of reports and that will actually give you more of a précis and get actually information that you need without going too much detail.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I wanted just to, for the record, I think it's needs to be noted that in this sort of this part of the council's business, I think it's very credible that 95% of the items that they should have were where they should be. I can imagine the type of work that's involved, that you end up with all sorts being everywhere over the sort of geographical area that's being covered. And I think that the operations manager should be complimented, and I agree with that. That's a good thing to be noting. In terms of comments with regard to the actions agreed, I don't have any problem with the way it's presented right now. I think it's quite succinct in as much as it tells us that there's been a sort of a recommendation raised by a member of the staff, and it makes it quite clear that those recommendations are now being actioned on. And I don't think we'd want the report bulked out with a great more detail. Thank you.
Kevin, I believe we're getting a report back in September on this issue.
On the asset register?
Yeah. IT.
Sorry, Chair. No, I think that will be the property management information system, Chair. So not specifically the asset register.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Keating, you said you had a question on the previous appendix. Well, we'll move on to Appendix 12, the current recommendations. Can I just check, are there any questions on Appendix 12? If not, we'll go back to Appendix 8. Councillor Keating? Whichever one you want to talk about first.
Well, in my head, 8 comes before 12.
And in mine, so you want to go ahead with 8? Okay, but we carried forward to 12 at your request. 8.
Appendix 8 refers to grants to organisations, summary audit report, and the page number is 69, and the item I wish to refer to is the bottom of that one page. It's a bullet point, and it identifies a failing in one respect. But it seems to identify a fundamental failing, in that there are rules and they haven't been applied in one case for some reason. It would be useful to know the reason why.
By all means. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillors. Councillor Keating. In terms of the approach to grant funding, members might be aware that we did a fundamental review after all the pots of revenue grant funding money were brought into the commissioning business unit. In terms of the review, we identified 2 approaches to grant funding. One was around those strategic partners and organisations that we were unlikely to ever step back from. You know, we're talking about BVA, citizens' advice, etc., etc. And in terms of those strategic partners, in order for them to undertake the best possible business planning that they can, those strategic grants were for 5 years. We also identified that there were much smaller organisations that might have programmes of work that they wanted to secure funding for, and therefore wanted to seek assistance from the council. We found ourselves in a situation where organisations, whether they were awarded £1,000 or £1 million, had the same funding agreement, the same application process and the same performance monitoring, and that just wasn't proportionate. So the other reason for this split between strategic and programme is when you look at a strategic grant, it's not ring-fenced to be spent in any particular way, and therefore the monitoring information around that is actually about how you run your business, and we need to know an awful lot in that. Whereas for a programme, if the programme was to deliver, I don't know, a programme of 12 rugby sessions down at Down Grange, that's just an example that I've plucked from thin air, that's much easier to monitor. What was the programme? What was it there to do? Did they deliver those 12 sessions, and what were the outcomes? And actually, if you think the monitoring information required for that is much, much smaller. So that's the reasons for the 2 types. Now, this was very, very new for our voluntary and community sector in terms of them coming to a decision about what sort of grant that they would apply for. And we supported them. We had workshops continuously throughout the period building up to the application process opening. And I was really pleased that 97% of organisations made the right choice in what application they were going to make. In terms of the 2 organisations that didn't, that was identified during our moderation stage. And rather than simply saying, sorry, you now can't have any funding for 3 or 5 years, when these were, in particular in one case that I know, was an organisation that we had funded for several years, and not an insignificant sum. It was, this was a significant amount of money that they were relying on in order for their organisation to continue. In that sense, we invited them to make a strategic application when they'd originally made applications for programme funding. That application went through exactly the same process of being marked and gone through moderation as every other, so it's treated exactly the same. We just said, you need to change your application type. Councillor Keating, what we're hoping is that that's the only time that will happen, because it was a new process. The next time this happens, we hope that organisations will be a little bit more aware and make better choices. I can't guarantee that would happen, but that's the hope, that actually that was because it was new and we only hit 97%. That's a long explanation, but I think that background's quite important for members.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Councillor Keating, do you want to move on to Appendix 12? Of course you can ask.
Well, you would have received, obviously we discussed the overpayments one just now, and then the other 2 obviously relate to the actual implementation of the property system, which I would say it has been going on for a while, and there is a paper, years, and there is a progress paper, as Kevin said earlier, is being presented now in September.
It's just to be studied with fundamental weaknesses, but it's a lot better than it was.
It has no impact with anyone else. So, can I just move down the... Beg your pardon.
These recommendations are the current recommendations, they're not overdue recommendations.
Yeah. But previously agreed reminders are overdue, obviously, aren't they?
And no doubt will be followed up. Mr. Bevan? Well, finished on that paper. So recommendation is that we note the contents of the report. Councillor Parker.
Can we add to it a thank you for the internal audit teams for their work they've done?
Yes.
I think that's the view of us all. Paper F, Statement of Accounts Process. Over to Dean.
Thank you, Chair. This is Paper F on page 86 of 129. This report explains the process for auditing, approving and publishing the Statement of Accounts for 2014-15, getting ahead of myself. It also summarises the changes to the process for future years as a result of changes to the accounts and audit regulations that are coming into effect in from 1st of April, came into effect for the 1st of April in terms of applying to the 2015-16 accounts. The report recommends that the committee note that the unaudited statement of accounts will be circulated to all members. I do actually happen to have, hot off the press, some hard copies here if you want to take one away with you today rather than wait for the email. It's quite a large document. Don't want to use up all your printer ink. Also, the committee are being asked to note that there will be a separate training session on the statement of accounts to be held possibly in July, I believe is the latest thinking. But that's for you to agree, or we'll set a date and you can decide whether you want to do it in July or later. Also, the officers are requesting that at least one member of the committee effectively carries out a detailed review of those accounts. We have done this in the past. Unfortunately, the councillor that's done it in the past isn't here today, but we might have some other fresh volunteers, maybe. In future, the whole process of producing the statement of accounts is being brought forward. The new regulations basically mean we have to publish the accounts 2 months earlier. Instead of September, we need to do it by the end of July, and we have to produce the draft accounts, the accounts that this report relates to today, by the end of May rather than the end of June. So if you have any questions on the process, I'll try and answer them for you. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. If you're looking at the timescales in relation to audit meetings, and I don't, no problem with the need to do it, will you do that examination taking into account the rest of the calendar of the council, including the cabinet meetings?
Yes, I mean, going back to the previous point that Councillor Parker made, yes, we would look at the whole schedule of meetings. Obviously, to try and get the accounts or draft accounts to this committee by the end of May be a bit difficult with the elections and the timings. But certainly, and also the one to get it to the end of July. I mean, normally this committee doesn't meet at all in July or August. So to get it to the July committee is going to be extremely tight, especially if you want to see it before it goes anywhere else. But the one, but you know, that nevertheless, we'll do our best to try and fit it in with the committee calendar.
And the committee calendar can be adjusted to fit in with you. Are there any questions, or should we just move to the recommendations? Let's go through them.
Chairman.
Councillor Putty.
Thank you, Chairman. The nomination for that one member.
We will be getting to that in a moment as we work through the recommendations.
Yeah.
So the first recommendation, the unaudited statement of accounts for the year ended 31st March will be available on the council website. We circulated to all members of the committee tomorrow. We're getting them today. Noted. A separate training session will be provided on the statement of accounts before the requirement to approve the accounts in September. Now, there are several possibilities here. I don't think we actually want a training session in August, but we can have one in July so that we can review the unaudited statements which we're getting today, or we can wait to September and have one so it's fresh in our memories when we look at the final version. Now, are there any views on that?
As soon as possible, Chairman.
So I've got 2 votes for July. My vote's also for July. Councillor Keating? Sounds like we're going for July, so a date to be arranged. If you circulate some possible dates, we can come back to you and find one that fits the majority of us, if not all. Note the timescales for producing and approving statements for the requirements of the new accounts and audit regulations. Noted. Schedule of meetings of this committee to be arranged to suit the new requirements. Noted. Recommended that the committee nominates at least 1 member to carry out a detailed review of the accounts. I certainly want to be involved in that process. Councillor John Leake has always done it in the past, and I'd hate to lose his experience. That's next year. Who knows what will happen next year? So I currently suggest that I'll do it in conjunction with Councillor Leake. Any comments?
Agreed.
Councillor Keating?
Will we get a report back from you two?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Will we get a report back from the who to do the examination?
We will let you know the results of our detailed examination if there are any problems arising from it. Paper G, Annual Governance Statements. This report provides the annual governance statement for approval by the committee. The annual governance statement is a measure of how well the council complied with the local code of corporate governance 2014-15. And I'll hand over to Lisa Kirkman.
Thank you, Chair. No further comments than the introduction made by the Chair, except members to say there has been an update to the paper. At page 102, which is the review of the effectiveness, at point D, on page 102, you'll see the very last sentence refers to the internal audit manager's amendments that he'd made to his paper earlier, in terms of the numbers of assurances in substantial, reasonable, etc. And I will update that paragraph to reflect those amendments. Thank you, Chair.
I trust everybody managed to read this report well before the meeting. Are there any questions? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm referring to page 108 of 129, paragraph 6, significant governance issues, which talks about a recommendation that the council leader and the chief executive should be developed in line with the local code of corporate governance principles. So you're there.
Sorry, no, I'm not. Can you tell me where we are again?
Paper G I'm on. Yes, I'm on
Sounds like you're straying into paper H.
My apologies.
You're holding your question till later. Right, any questions on paper G?
Sorry, it's my vision. You'll excuse me. I have new glasses, variable lenses. And if anyone else has got them, they'll know what I'm struggling with. So my apologies. It is, thank you, Ian. It is page 103, paragraph 6. Significant governance issues. And I'm referring to the recommendation. So my questions here are, why now? Why not before? What are the concerns? And over what period has it not been the way it should be?
Councillor Parker, it's the internal audit manager does that recording against the progress of the Code of Corporate Governance, and it would be him that would be able to say why that recommendation is in place. All I can tell you is, having inherited that recommendation, is that I'm ensuring it's being undertaken. I can't give you any historical context to that at this meeting. I'd be happy to check in with him and email round members after the meeting, if that's acceptable, Chair.
That sounds like that'll be the way it will be. Mr. Putty?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask questions with regards to 103 of 1 to 9 at 5? Why PwC?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Dan. Is that to be what's going to happen?
That is to be what is
offered by
going to
officer,
happen.
but I didn't know.
We will be told,
As per the question.
as per the question.
Thank you.
Yes, at 5, why PwC has issued unqualified conclusion.
If I can help the chair. Yeah, that's part of the annual annual audit opinion on the economy efficiency and effectiveness. So it's one of the value for money assessments that they have to do under the local under the accounting code of practice. They have to give a comment on the the value for money approach of the council, and they do that every year. It always lags a year, so this is that was on the 24th of November 2014. So that was for the 13-14 accounts, and this will get updated when they've done the 14-15 accounts. But yes, it's part of the annual audit that they do, and they have to give a statement on that process.
Okay, recommendation, the annual governance statement for 14-15 is approved. Agreed? Agreed. Paper H. Every council is obliged to prepare a local code of corporate governance. The 15-16 code is presented for approval by the committee, and it's exactly the same as the one for 14-15. Of course.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, members, yes, it is the same as you approved last year. There's no further addendums been issued since we incorporated those in 12-13 to the code. The stewardship team were happy that the code still complied with the SITFA and SOLIS frameworks and with current good governance practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would like just to ask the makeup of this stewardship team, please.
Yeah, of course, Councillor Parker. It is referred to on page 106 of 129, just to outline exactly who it is. I appreciate for councillors there's been quite a few change in job descriptions, and that was probably one of the biggest things I had to do with some of these documents. So it's the Director of Governance and Commissioning, the Head of Resources, a Section 151 officer, Head of Commissioning Governance, myself as Monitoring Officer, the Internal Audit Manager, the Head of Human Resources, and the Council Policy Manager.
Supplementary, please, Chair.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for... my query really is, in this type of responsibility, and I know that we are mainly referring to roles of officers, but is it really against protocol that when this appears in a report, this is now setting the governance, the annual governance, corporate code of governance, could we not have officer names against the titles? Because the way the council directory is set, you can't type in Director of Governance. You need to know the name.
Happy to take that on board, Chair, and also filter that down for any council reports, because that would apply whether it's the Code of Corporate Governance or anything else. I'll take that back to my colleagues, Councillor Parker.
Any further questions?
Thank you, Chairman. On page 107 of 1 to 9, the risk issues at 6.2.1. What do we mean by reputational damage?
So, Councillor Putty, the Code of Corporate Governance is our commitment to have high standards of transparency and all those other things that come with good governance. If we don't have one, I suppose it's what message is that giving, and therefore the reputational damage that we won't commit to having a Code of Corporate Governance that does set those high standards.
Not to mention the fact that Councillor Parker would probably have a heart attack. Right, can we approve? Yes. Right. Moving on, paper I, which is the work plan for future meetings, and I think there are some amendments to that. Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of amendments. For the September meeting, the 21st and 9th, I was going to suggest to the committee, as was mentioned earlier, that we bring an update on the property management information system. On the 23rd of November, again, I was going to recommend to the committee that they receive a risk management update. And on the 1st of February, you'll note this is PwC. That would actually be our new auditors at that point. So for the external auditor plan, it will be EY, Ernst & Young. Thank you, Chair.
Kevin, I think there's also a Treasury Management Monitoring Report required for September.
Indeed, there is, Chair. Thank you for reminding me. The other one I was going to recommend was that one. Yes, the quarter one Treasury Management Report.
And lastly, but by no means leastly, where are we with the Ethical Working Party? Because I believe we could have a report in September on the position.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if the committee would want that, then I could bring a report on a proposed way forwards for that to the committee in September.
Councillor Parker.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the prompt. The position that I understood it was that we were waiting for the appointment of an intern. And immediately on that appointment, the workshop meetings would recommence. And so I don't know how we're going to be in any position to be making any report in September, because I haven't been advised of any appointment and I haven't been contacted with regard to recommencing with my colleagues the workshop meetings. So it's, as I suggested, this work goes further back, and I expect probably we'll still be talking about doing something in 2016.
We can discuss and debate this in the September meeting when we get the report back. Councillor Parker.
What report is that? I mean, you know, what are we talking about? We're going to have a report saying that we're going to appoint somebody and we're going to recommence workshops. We don't need a report for that. I don't know, unless somebody else has been having discussions that I don't know about.
Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you. We were supposed to have a replacement for Andrew Hunter in June. That was the undertaking given to us. Kevin?
Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the intention is really just to bring back a report on options for the way forward for the committee. Because unfortunately, the resource that was initially earmarked is unlikely to be in place by that time. So I really need to, and the committee really needs to have some options, I think, about the way forward. And it seemed that September would be the most appropriate time to bring that forward.
Councillor Parker.
I would request that this is noted on the meeting agenda. This is a fudge and it's further procrastination, on the officer part in actually delaying progressing this work.
I certainly have no criticism of the officers. Are we agreed on the programme as it stands? Thank you. There are no items of a public or confidential nature, so meeting closed.